Hello, McKenzie.
Hi,
Lovely to meet you.
likewise.
I'm most glad to introduce the two of you. That's the actual fun of this thing on somebody else's Zoom account. I'm sure both of you are aware of August Sander, the famous Weimar Republic German, citizens of the 20th century. Everybody and my dead grandmother knows August Sander, and Sander has come to embody the kind of very humanist notion in photographic portraiture of the ability to kind of sum up somebody's character in the exquisite and well-timed and well-framed chosen moment, right? Which is what photography trades on. A contemporary of August Sander was Helmar Lursky, who his approach to photography was, and he was outspoken about this, was really in contrast with August Sander. And he said, photography is nothing more than it's kind of light on skin on bone. So almost as if it's a kind of a very materialist reading as opposed to a humanist, and I don't think it's a coincidence he's been kind of written out of photographic history because of his radical stance at exactly the same time. And the series he's most famous for was shot in 36, and it's a series of 140 pictures of one man on the balcony of an apartment block in Palestine in 1936, which is now Tel Aviv. And all he used was a series of mirrors and sunlight. And that's the only light source. And it leads to this kind of very sculptural, as you see in the picture, the kind of very sculptural, strange light. And he was working with an 8x10 camera that's incredibly laborious and slow. And you could see he was asking his subject, who was an engineer, just to slowly move his head and then redo a shot and go ahead and make these 140 pictures. And since I kind of got infatuated with the Lursky work, particularly because of its kind of, I don't know how else to put it, maybe it's not the right word, materialist, but it's lack of sentimentality and kind of nostalgia. And when I think of the way August Sander's work slipped very easily into a kind of eugenic narrative that was part of the Nazi regime, because he started with the banker, the nobility, and ended off with the vagrant, right? Something really impressed me about this work. And for years, I was kind of in the back of my head, walking around looking for a subject to reenact this, this special one day, which they shared, but with a twist. And it was when I met Gigi, who is a friend, who is a transgender activist, actress, and model, that it suddenly all fell into place. I was just telling McKenzie, I've spent the last 24 hours reading both of your memoirs, autobiographies, however you want to put it. And this is a quote in the beginning of your book, which means it must be kind of central, and oddly from Le Corbusier, who is probably the least progressive human being I expected to say anything. But the nation is an administrative one, consequently artificial. The native land is a sentimental term, consequently natural. The nation has fixed frontiers, conventions established by wars, treaties, victories, and defeats, a material fact. The native land converges on one center, one heart. There are no frontiers to the native land. It is an act of faith, a spiritual conception.
I'm really interested in understanding the gender order, and specifically the binary gender order, as some kind of iteration of the nation state as defined by Le Corbusier in that quote. And I wonder, McKenzie, if you have any thoughts about that.
I mean, modern states are in the business of defining who gets to be ordinary. And there's sort of always two exceptions to who gets to be ordinary. And there's those who are below the quality of being ordinary and aren't recognizable in full humanity at all. But there's sort of weirdly the other side of that is those who are extra, who don't get to be ordinary because you have to be special. And there's a way that the figure of the trans woman can occupy either of those spots, but is never allowed to be ordinary.
When I look at that, I happen to have, I mean, my screen is beautifully framed because I have the two of you in the middle, and then I've got August Sander's bourgeois father and his two sons on one side, and then that really troubling kind of quite liminal portrait on the other side by Lersky. I happen to be researching early 20th century Berlin at the moment, and specifically the work of what I think we should call the queer movement, that is the prototype of the movement of the early 21st century, led by people like Magnus Hirschfeld, who was doing his work, which included defining transvestites for the first time and working with the Berlin police to make sure that transvestites, people we would call transgender today, had ID cards that prevented them from being harassed. That happened in Weimar, Berlin. But at the same time that this was happening, and the public identity of Schwulen and transvestitien was kind of all over the place. There were queer magazines, transvestite magazines, gay magazines, lesbian magazines on the newsstands at the Potsdamer Platz. At the same time that was happening, and Germany was coming to terms with the fact that even though they were still criminalized, there were queer members of this new empire. Sander was making his portraits of society. And I don't recall there being queer members of the society, explicitly queer members of the society that he was making, from the vagabond up to the nobleman. Even though he would have known about them, I'm absolutely sure he knew Magnus Hirschfeld because they were of the same kind of bourgeois social democrat, eugenic, actually, persuasion. Eugenic was not a swear word in the early 20th century. It was appropriated in a particular way by the Nazis. It was actually something of the left, which is an interesting topic we can talk about. And the point I'm making is that Sander was making something of he was in the name of documentation, he was defining the nation state as opposed to the native land. And there's something in that portrait of Lersky that I see up on my screen that seems to be of the native land. And I'm thinking about what is the nation state and what is the native land, and where, and you know, let's put this image of Gesander into the mix too, and where that fits in, and what you're doing with those conceptions of nation state and native land.
That there's multiple ones, and they're formally quite similar, but they're not identical pictures. Is kind of to me that's the interesting thing, because as you're mentioning, there's that notion of picking the frame that captures this idea of interiority, and I don't know how many there are, but there's like multiples. So which one is the decisive moment? Which one captures the soul? You don't get to ask that. because the mechanical quality of photography is sort of being highlighted as something that has this quality of repetition, can produce these multiple frames, as all of our cell phones do now. I don't know if anyone's used Live, where you get to pick the moment in the shot. So there's a way in which this is to me relates to how photography now works in the cell phone world. So to me, it's breaking that sense of photography as portrait photography as giving us access to someone who usually ought to be considered a subject, or occasionally photography is like then treating the human figure as object to be excluded. But this sort of does neither. It's sort of highlighting the mechanics of it itself. And allowing maybe the face to slip away a little bit. It's hard to do a close-up on a face and have the face slip away a little bit from being readable as subjectivity, but I feel like it does a little bit.
What do you mean slip away? What do you mean slip away? Putting voice to something I was feeling when I was looking at the pictures.
Yeah, well,
I couldn't find words for.
I start with this picture and I go, oh, so has Adam chosen this picture as the one that gives me a sense of who this person is? And so I then relate to an imagined subject behind it. Or is it that one? Which is, like formally similar. The lighting is the same. It's probably the same day. The background's the same. But I'm like, wait, I get a very different idea of who this person is from that one. And then from that one, I'm like, wait, what? And then I'm starting to think about how much that's an accident of, the person was just moving in a particular way. Is this a person who I gather has experience modeling and things like that, who's striking angles, but not quite, it's not quite that. So yeah, there's something a little interestingly slippery about how the materiality of the process of photographing and the presence of the face gets highlighted. So it's a little bit outside of photography's role in sort of creating the idea of who subjects should be and which subjects to exclude as, photography as the kind of language of citizenship.
Lersky might as well have been using a marble sculpture, because there is no emotional content. There's simply the movement of light and contour. And Gigi, being an experienced actor and performer, and it turned out on the day we did the shoot, which was 9 hours long, because we used the same large format, which is an incredibly laborious and kind of ritualistic process, and requires real intensity and focus from everybody, and it's really reciprocal. So two things I found missing in these very binary positions of Lersky versus Sander was, where's the person in their complexity and multiple masks
Well, I suppose the question I have, and I had when paging through your book, is, can there be a person? Can that complexity, can portraiture aspires to that complexity, but and there's something about the facial portrait in that way. I mean, very interesting to me that it's clear how you were working with what Lersky did, but that you chose particularly when working with queerness and gender, and a subject who identifies herself as transgender, that you chose the head and shoulders rather than the body, which is of course the stereotypical way of representing the transgender woman, to show transition, in the shape of body. And there's something about the face, a face which is so compact, in that it is. I mean, the face of course is gendered, but the face suggests it doesn't. The soul and the mind too, because and in a very cliched way, you imagine that you're entering that soul and the mind through the eyes, and and your subject here has particularly translucent eyes, but like there is no entry. There is no entry, and that was something I felt. It was quite a strong feeling I had with this work is what's out of bounds and maybe what should be out of bounds.
You're totally right. In my skepticism of photography, which has been the kind of subtext of 30 years of work, but this is the first time I've got to say that I picked up a camera in 15 years, and it's the first time I fell in love with the process again, because the way I worked, the way Gigi worked me, let's put it that way, was she said, you know, at one point I said, Gigi, can you bring somebody into the room who you've lost, somebody very close? And I just want you to close your eyes and bring that person in and for them to be here. And we took 15 minutes around that. And then I said, can you, you know, after another few, can you open your eyes? And then took the picture. And then I said, well, now Gigi, and she said, can you stop? You know, you've just taken me to a place of like real trauma, and you suddenly want to throw me into like the Olympic Games, you know, it's like, so the point is, I get what you're saying in denying the kind of where the obvious things about transition could have gone, but I don't agree with there's no access point. I think there are access points into different emotions, even though photography is one of the most pathetic forms to try and communicate complexity of character, and I'd be the first to admit it. But also what's really important is a collaboration between, it's a little bit like the conversation we're having here, you know, three people from such different positions, such different geographies and identities, and working with C.A. Conrad and their position in life and how, and their relationship to words. Gigi, over many weeks, explaining to me the notion of body dysmorphia and transition and the actual physical, like re-rendering of a body and the pain that's involved in that, and you know, and the joy, and I don't know quite where I'm going with this, but
well, when I look at the photographs, I mean, the first thing I see is a sister, and someone who whose body of work I looked up, and who on one level is an extraordinary person and artist. So, you know, important caveat. But getting to be ordinary in a certain sense, like getting to have a face that's pictured and is pictured outside of the realm of fashion photography or conventional portraiture. So there's certain genres it's sort of evading a little bit, and I found that so heartening. To there's a sister in this book who's somebody thought about working with, where you generate something else. Like Mark, I see it a little bit in a materialist way, that I'm looking at the result of a process and being curious about the process that people were involved in there, rather than, I'm a little resistant to trying to read what the expressions are trying to tell me, but I'm interested in the differences between them, like the little differences in how someone is presenting themselves and how one might read that, what's going on with that. That strikes me as interesting. And then I know C.A. Conrad's work a little, and I've seen him read and things like that. So the sense of queer survival that's in that poem, and defiance, I connect that to this range of images as well. This is somebody who's used to being able to produce appearances partly for survival purposes, as well as for creative purposes. And in between those two things, of the face of survival and the face of being glamorous and fabulous, is ordinariness in the affirmative sense of the word, and that I really value.
As a 50-year-old white cis man, trying to unlearn what's ingrained in my DNA from my like Jewish Zionist schooling in an apartheid regime, and as a white man brought up in a hideously kind of patriarchal home, trying to learn how to be an ally. And Gigi has been, and CA have been so generous in having the patience to correct me and give me the chance. But not only that, you know, the day after the shoot, Gigi phoned and said, it was interesting, you know, at lunch, you misgendered me only once during the whole day. No. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And she said, no, I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm wondering what I did to provoke that.
Yes.
So that was a beautiful conversation, because it went from like like, oh shit, into wow. You know what I mean? And if you should, I'm just going to say one more thing, and then I'll keep stum, because I'm always talk too much. But I just because I mentioned quite a lot of your, I think the difference in terms of, Mark, how you and McKenzie, how you both came out, how you found your identity is so startling. Because Mark, it seems like I've never read an account with less agony in it, in terms of a notion. Like, you were 18, you fell in love with Adam. It felt so, I was envious, like of how natural it felt to you, for you. And
that might be the dazzle. That might be the dazzle.
Okay.
There might be a little bit of dazzle there.
The glitter.
That might be a little bit of glitter. Masking the wounds.
Okay. But just comparing it to Mackenzie's, which oddly enough, how different all of our struggles are in terms of where we're hoping to reach in a peaceful place in terms of sexuality and gender. The violence around Mackenzie's group, or the way you describe it, Mackenzie, the violence is one thing, but I guess also the drugs and the wildness and the I found it really interesting, because I know that you've written a lot about the Situationist International, but you use the word détournement here in a very different way, which is détournement de mineur. So as well as being against the law, regardless of age, and on top of that, he wanted a white boy. And I found that, like, détournement, you know, which I've always associated as like a progressive thing of the Situationist International. It's like suddenly becomes rip. But there's one other thing that I just wanted to discuss, which blew my mind really, which was this idea that you describe this notion of a utopia, really. In my utopia, before anyone attempts to fuck another, they will first have learned how to be fucked, irrespective of genders and whatnot. And so I became one of the fucked ones, the penetrated ones, the engulfing ones, the ones who open for others rather than who expect others to do the opening. There are penetrators and the penetrated. Either your body opens and encloses another, or your body extends itself out of itself into another. And flipping back to the way we started about the nation states, and not to undermine what you were saying by making it purely metaphorical, but it really struck me that, because I think the calcification of my heteronormative heterosexual being is really challenged by those words.
Yeah, like the whole book is a phenomenology of bottoming, basically, and that was how I eventually found. Yeah, because I tried and failed to be a gay man 3 times, and it's kind of like, oh, like bottoming giving me this gender but like gay men don't want to go. Like that's sort of not how this works. And so yeah, it's a comedy of errors in that sense of, but very much based on phenomenology of penetrability, but which to me has all of the scales, right? I mean, the obsession with the borders of the nation and purifying the nation, of refusing the nation's penetrability, is of a piece with masculinity's refusal of those things. Is of a piece with, I was talking to friends in the club last night about why, like cis-het men can't dance because they won't let the beat fuck them. Like gay men dance because whether they're tops or bottoms in sexuality, they'll let the beat fuck them. Like you have to be a bottom on the dance floor to enjoy it at all. So, like what are the scales and sensibilities in which a certain kind of, but also qualified openness, there's that sort of Deleuzean sense of completely turning the subject inside out to the point of disillusion. Maybe it's not that, but the regulated ability to openness as a thing that could connect different scales. And I want to be clear, this is not a universal trans experience or anything. It was just my particular path, and there might be other ones, but it does make me think about the glitter in my wound and penetrability, and the ways of thinking about that as sort of not welcomed but embraced in a certain way, because the other side of being a penetrable body is being vulnerable. And admitting that one's vulnerable and giving up a kind of power from penetrability on a personal level, something one never quite succeeds with at larger scales. States never want to admit their penetrability.
As you're talking, McKenzie, the last lines of C.A. Conrad's poem came to me. Lines that I haven't quite come to terms with. I don't quite get them. But I think there might be some clue to them in what you've just said. It ends with my friend Mandy. My friend Mandy calls after a long shift at the strip club to say, while I'm standing in line for death, I'm fanning my hot pussy with your new book. Will you sign it next week, my fearless faggot sister? And I'm thinking of the book and the pussy and penetration and the shape of the poem, which I'm assuming is C.A. Conrad's typography. So I don't know how easily you can see this, but it's like a man and that's his little dick out there. I mean, and there's his head, and that little dick is out there. The words that make that little dick is yet another poem not written by a poet. And I'm thinking about creative production and penetrability and fanning one's hot pussy with an object rather than.
I have a whole riff in reverse cowgirl about rolling the book up and fucking it,
okay, you've been there already.
That's not your thing. You could roll it up and be fucked by it, so it's sort of kind of like make literal the sort of eroticism of textuality, that which is all very, very abstract and camp in say Roland Barthes' Pleasure of the Text, so I'm like, that was what I was thinking about. So like, you just roll it up and
I've got that here, but I think you described it perfectly. But, I grew up with one progressive book on a giant bookshelf, and it was called Our Bodies, Ourselves, a book by and for women. It was made in the 70s. It was like, it was my introduction to everything. And there was this amazing photo, which I'll never forget, where the woman with her legs open and she had a mirror and she used it to investigate her own sexual parts. And honest, but these lines of your thing did the same thing to me that book did to me at about 12 years old. And I almost took them as instructional because they get that way at some point. You talk about the penis entering the anus and it going through two two almost valves is the way I understood it. And if it's not done in the correct way, it can be very painful, if not very physically destructive. And but I guess what those words did, and that book did, because I wasn't a woman, but I was reading a book by and for women, but it opened something in me. And I guess I was saying to somebody last night, you know, I'm 50 years old and I haven't been fucked. And I think
This time.
just about. But
I'm 60, honey. It's still possible. Trust me. Yeah. I mean, there is a there's discourse in trans world about T for T, about whether we should have separatism that would be sexual, social, cultural, and I see value of that, and sometimes that's necessary. But I think it's more common that one ends up with people who aren't. So, like my girlfriend is cis, and you know, I'm interacting with people who are trans adjacent, if you like. So I think that's sort of more what I would say the future is, like, how do these things start to not matter?
Yeah.
I don't know. If you were opened up by our bodies, ourselves, you use that word, open up. Are you appropriating a bottom's subjectivity by saying opened up? Or does that actually mean for you opened up? I mean, you decide, you tell me. So I know that I absolutely understand why there is T for T or the need for Black spaces only, or a need to call on white cisgender male people around issues of appropriation. But the disruptive possibilities of the kind of collaboration you've been involved with Gigi and Sia Conrad are more generative.
Yeah, that's more interesting to me, because as soon as you've tried to enclose, all right, this is transness, then you start to worry about the penetrability of your trans world by somebody who then you perceive as not. So that there's a lot of trans gatekeeping going on, you know, like you're not a real trans person kind of thing. And I'm like, you know, and of course one might want one's particular affinities to be close, but there's a sense that the politics of these things require not being about identity, about being about solidarity. So like, it doesn't matter.
Totally.
If you've got a dick or not, you can still get fucked over as a trans woman. You know, like, it doesn't matter what kind of gay man you are, you can still get bashed for that if that's how you're perceived, you know. So I think the solidarity in the political sense has to sort of not be about those identities, even though, you know, people obviously, you make your own affinities, but the affinities of difference culturally also interest me. That's why I like the sort of little 3-person weaving of this particular book, as putting together people. And yeah, like, I'm not too fond of ally either, because people who use it often turn out not to be. It's not a reliable guide. They're an ally until you do anything wrong. Like, that's the other thing. If you're trans, if you're gay, if you're some kind of other, you're not allowed to do anything wrong. You have to be on your best behavior all the time. And then when you're not, because no regular ordinary person can be on their best behavior all the time, then they're suddenly like, oh no, we didn't mean when you fuck up. We only mean when you're fabulous, then when you're ally. You know? Yeah, so I'm not happy with that language.
Okay, no, I really get you both, and I'm also aware of how there's been a beautiful weaving between the three of us who come from very different places in our kind of professional language and our, you know, and our backgrounds. And but I just want to thank you both, not only for this time, but also for those memoirs, because they were, I've got so much from both of you in terms of your critical work and your historical work, but this was something, the openness was very generous, and as was this last hour, so thank you.
Clearly, I've got some reading to do, McKenzie. I'm looking forward to it. I want to go
Likewise.
find it. And let's all meet together sometime somewhere and have a drink and
That
carry
would be
on this
nice.
conversation.
All right.
I'd love that.
Adam, it's a beautiful book, and it was a pleasure to be able to celebrate it with you. And my compliments to your collaborators as well.
Thank you. I'll pass
Yeah.
that on. Thank you.
Yeah, I do want to say that too. And I think what I want, one of the things I sort of made some notes this morning of what I wanted to say in terms of how I responded to it. And I think it is actually reflected in the conversation we've just had, is that it really challenged me about how I look and what I see, and also about how I present myself to be looked at. And I don't have the words for how it challenged me, but it was quite unsettling. And it made me think of the lines from C.A. Conrad: glitter on a queer is not to dazzle, but to unsettle the foundation of this murderous culture. And I think that to the extent that it glitters, and it does, I mean, it's beautiful, and the sun glitters on Gigi's face, your sunlight and mirrors. To the extent that it glitters, I feel it is in a way that is very provocatively and powerfully unsettling. So thank you for that.
Thank you.